The harsh winds whipped through the jagged peaks of the Albanian Alps, carrying with them the scent of pine and earth. These mountains, ancient as the people who called them home, had stood for millennia, their peaks piercing the sky like sentinels guarding the heart of a forgotten world. Here, in the remote villages nestled deep within the highlands, life moved to a rhythm dictated by the land, the seasons, and the long-held traditions of the Albanian tribes. The people of these tribes, known as the Ghegs, had lived in isolation for generations. With their rugged lives shaped by the land they lived on, they had developed a culture and set of customs that seemed untouched by time. The mountains, though beautiful, were not kind. Their steep slopes and harsh winters made survival a constant challenge. The Ghegs were fierce and independent, their lives intertwined with the land, their traditions, and their tight-knit communities. It was a world where honor and loyalty were the bedrock of society, and each family was bound by a code of conduct that traced its roots back to ancient times. The Kanun, a set of unwritten laws, governed every aspect of life. These laws, passed down through generations, were strict but fair, ensuring that justice was served even in the most remote corners of Albania. The Kanun dictated everything from the way disputes were settled to the rules for hospitality, and even the sacred practice of blood feuds. In the highlands, the Ghegs lived in small, isolated villages, each one a tight-knit community. The houses were made of stone, sturdy and simple, built to withstand the harsh winters. The roofs were steep and slanted, designed to shed the heavy snow that blanketed the mountains in the colder months. Inside, the homes were warm, filled with the smell of wood smoke from the fires that burned in the hearths. The hearth was the heart of every home, a place not only for cooking and warmth but also for socializing. Around the fire, stories were told, songs were sung, and the history of the tribe was passed down from one generation to the next. Life in the highlands was not easy. The Ghegs were farmers and herders, their livelihoods dependent on the land and the animals they raised. They grew grains like wheat and barley, but the harsh soil and unpredictable weather made farming a challenge. The real wealth of the tribe, however, lay in their livestock: sheep, goats, and cattle. These animals provided not only food and clothing, but also played a crucial role in the social fabric of the community. Livestock were often used in trade, and the most valuable animals were considered symbols of status. Hunting was also an essential part of life in the highlands. The mountains were home to a variety of wildlife: wild boars, deer, and even bears roamed the forests. Hunting was not just a means of sustenance, but a deeply ingrained tradition that connected the people to their ancestors. The skills required for hunting were passed down from father to son, and the hunt was often seen as a rite of passage for young men. It was a way for them to prove their bravery, skill, and readiness to take on the responsibilities of adulthood. The Ghegs were a proud people, and their pride was most evident in their warriors. The men of the tribe were known for their strength, courage, and fierceness in battle. The tribes had a long history of conflict, both with other tribes and with invaders from outside. For centuries, they had fought to defend their lands and their way of life, never bending to outside authority. They were fiercely independent, unwilling to submit to anyone who threatened their freedom. Honor was the cornerstone of Gheg society. A man's word was his bond, and the tribe placed great importance on personal integrity. A man's reputation was everything, and any slight, real or perceived, could lead to a blood feud. The blood feud was a sacred tradition in the highlands, and it was governed by strict rules. If a member of one family was wronged, the family could seek retribution against the wrongdoer or their kin. The feud could go on for generations, with each side seeking vengeance until the matter was settled. It was a brutal, unyielding practice, but it was the law of the mountains, the Kanun, the law that governed every aspect of life in the highlands. Was not just a set of rules, it was a moral code that shaped the very essence of the Gheg people. It dictated how they interacted with each other, how they resolved disputes, and even how they treated guests. Hospitality was sacred, and no matter how difficult life was in the highlands, a guest would always be offered food and shelter. A violation of this sacred duty could lead to disgrace and shame. In the villages, elders were highly respected. They were the keepers of wisdom, the ones who had lived through the hardest trials and had seen the rise and fall of many seasons. Their word was law, and their stories were the thread that connected the generations. The elders were responsible for maintaining the traditions and ensuring that the younger generations adhered to the rules of the canon. They were the storytellers, the historians, and the guardians of the tribe's identity. But life in the highlands was not just about survival and tradition. It was also about celebration. The Ghegs, like many other tribes, had a rich cultural heritage filled with music, dance, and art. The sound of the gaida, a traditional Albanian pipe, echoed through the mountains, and songs of old were sung at festivals and gatherings. These festivals, often held in the summer months, were a time for the community to come together, to share food and drink, and to celebrate life in the highlands. The celebrations were lively, filled with music, dancing, and storytelling, a reminder that even in the harshest of environments, there was joy to be found. As the sun set behind the towering peaks of the Albanian Alps, casting long shadows over the village, the people of the tribe gathered around their fires, ready to share stories, songs, and food. Their lives, though shaped by hardship, were rich with tradition and community. The mountains, with their beauty and danger, had forged the Gheg people into a fierce and proud tribe, whose way of life had endured for centuries. And as long as the mountains stood, the people would continue to live according to the laws of the canon, honoring their ancestors and passing on their stories to the generations that would come after them. The mountains of Albania had always been more than just a backdrop to the lives of the Ghegs. They were a constant companion, shaping and defining every aspect of life in the highlands. From the towering peaks to the hidden valleys, the land held deep meaning for those who lived on it. But perhaps no aspect of their lives was more intricately woven into the fabric of the mountains than the concept of honor. In the world of the Ghegs, honor was not merely a personal trait, but a powerful, binding force that connected each individual to their family, their tribe, and the land itself. The daily life of a Gheg was dominated by this all-important value. It was not just about pride or reputation, but about a deep, almost sacred commitment to the family and the community. To understand the Ghegs, one had to understand their relationship to the canon, the ancient code of law and conduct that governed their behavior, relationships, and social interactions. This code, though unwritten, was universally understood and respected by all members of the tribe. The canon was a collection of rules that had evolved over centuries, drawn from the wisdom of generations. It was a system of moral and legal principles that dictated everything from family structure and inheritance to hospitality and revenge. It was also a code of honor, one that demanded individuals to act with integrity, loyalty, and respect for others. The canon established a strict hierarchy within the tribe, where elders held the highest authority, and younger members were expected to defer to them. The gem, the wise elders of the tribe, were the living embodiments of the canon, the ones who upheld its laws and ensured that justice was served. The most crucial element of the canon was its focus on the family. The family was the foundation of Gheg society, and each person's duty to their family came above all else. A person's reputation was intimately tied to the actions and behavior of their relatives, and the shame or dishonor of one could bring disgrace upon the entire family. This was why the Ghegs were so protective of their honor, because to lose it was to lose everything. The role of the patriarch in the family was central to this system. He was not only the head of the household, but also the guardian of its reputation. His word was law, and his decisions were final. However, his power was not absolute. The patriarch was bound by the canon to act in the best interests of the family and the tribe, and his authority was tempered by a deep sense of responsibility. He was expected to be just, wise, and fair, and his actions were always guided by a sense of honor that was deeply ingrained in the culture. In the villages of the Ghegs, the elders, or Gem, held a special place of reverence. These were the men who had lived long lives, accumulated knowledge, and proven themselves worthy of leading their people. They were not simply the rulers of the tribe, they were its moral compass, its guides in times of conflict and strife. The elders of the tribe were responsible for resolving disputes, settling feuds, and ensuring that the principles of the Kanun were upheld. Their wisdom was unquestioned, and their decisions were final. The importance of family was also evident in the way the Ghegs structured their homes. The traditional Gheg house, known as the Kulla, was built to reflect the values of the tribe. These stone houses were often large and imposing, with thick walls that could withstand the harshest of winters. They were designed to protect the family and keep it safe from external threats. But they were also built to foster close family ties. The interior of the house was divided into distinct areas for each family member. Yet all the rooms were interconnected, allowing for constant interaction and support. Life in the Kulla revolved around the family, with the men of the household working the land or engaging in trade, while the women took care of the home, raising children, and maintaining the household. Children were taught the values of the Kanun from a young age, learning the importance of family, honor, and loyalty. It was through these teachings that the next generation of Ghegs came to understand their place in the world. However, the Ghegs' world was not solely defined by family and tradition. The harsh realities of life in the mountains meant that survival often required a strong sense of cooperation and resilience. The Ghegs were skilled hunters, herders, and farmers, and they relied on the land to provide for them. The forests that surrounded their villages were full of game, and the rivers were teeming with fish. Hunting was not just a means of sustenance. It was a rite of passage, a way for young men to prove their strength, skill, and bravery. Hunting was often a communal activity, with groups of men going out together to track and kill wild boar, deer, and bears. The hunt was not just about feeding the tribe. It was about maintaining the tribe's place in the natural order. It was a demonstration of strength and courage, qualities that were highly valued in Gheg society. The success of a hunt was often celebrated with a feast, where the men of the tribe would gather to share stories, drink, and honor their ancestors. The mountain villages of the Ghegs were often isolated from the rest of the world, making them self-reliant. The Ghegs were fiercely independent and proud of their ability to survive in such a harsh and unforgiving environment. Outsiders were viewed with suspicion, and the Ghegs were wary of anything that threatened their way of life. This isolation bred a sense of unity and solidarity within the tribe, where everyone knew their place and understood their duties. Despite their isolation, the Ghegs were not without contact with the outside world. Traders would occasionally pass through the region, bringing goods and news from other parts of Albania and beyond. But these encounters were rare, and the Ghegs remained largely unaffected by the changes sweeping through the rest of Europe. Their lives were defined by the mountains, by the Kanun, and by the sacred bond of family. They lived in a world where time seemed to stand still, where the ancient traditions of their ancestors continued to shape their present and future. The Kanun, in all its forms, was not only a set of laws but a living tradition that shaped the very identity of the Ghegs. It was more than just a collection of rules. It was the embodiment of their way of life, their connection to the land, and their commitment to one another. To be a Gheg was to live according to the Kanun, to uphold the values of honor, loyalty, and respect for family and community. It was a way of life that had endured for centuries and would continue to shape the future of the Ghegs for generations to come. But as the world outside the mountains changed, the Ghegs faced challenges that threatened to disrupt their way of life. The pressures of modernization, the encroachment of new ideas and technologies, and the constant threat of conflict and war had begun to take their toll. The once remote villages of the Ghegs were no longer as isolated as they had been in the past. And the Kanun, though still respected, was increasingly challenged by the forces of change. The question that loomed over the Ghegs was whether their ancient way of life could survive in the face of these pressures, or whether the mountain tribes would be swallowed up by the tide of history. Among the Ghegs of Albania, life was ruled not by the passing whims of politics or the modern laws of cities, but by the ancient code of the Kanun, a set of laws and customs that governed everything from family honor to the distribution of wealth and resources. These rules were passed down orally through generations, ensuring that each generation would remain bound to its ancestors, its traditions, and its identity. The Kanun was more than just a legal framework. It was the heart of the Gheg way of life. It shaped every aspect of their interactions, dictating how one could speak and even think. Its teachings were written in the collective memory of the people, not in books, but in the words and actions of those who carried it within them. In every village and family, the Kanun was upheld as a sacred trust, its rules deeply embedded into the fabric of daily existence. The most important law of the Kanun was the concept of besa, the sacred vow or promise of hospitality and protection. If a person swore besa to a guest or a stranger, they were bound by the most sacred duty to protect them at all costs. To break besa was to dishonor not only oneself but the entire family, and even the village itself. It was this concept of besa that gave the Ghegs their reputation for loyalty and fierce protection of their own. To accept besa from a host was to be treated like family, no matter who you were, and it carried with it the sacred responsibility of both sides to honor that bond. In the tight-knit villages, the Kanun also provided guidelines for resolving disputes, managing family affairs, and protecting land and property. For instance, blood feuds were a key part of the Gheg way of life. If a member of one family was killed by another, the Kanun demanded that the family of the victim seek revenge, continuing the cycle until an agreement of peace or reconciliation was reached. This was called Jakmaria, or blood vengeance, and it could last for generations. Though it sounds brutal by modern standards, it was seen as a necessary means of ensuring justice in a world where the law of the state was far away, and where the Gheg people had to rely on their own sense of justice and fairness. In many villages, these blood feuds were resolved through what was known as the Lidja e Generalit, or the Assembly of Elders. The elders, respected men of the village who had lived long lives and seen many seasons pass, would gather together in the village square or in a communal meeting hall to discuss matters of importance. These assemblies were a cornerstone of the Gheg way of life, as they provided a space for the community to make decisions based on the wisdom and experience of their elders. Here, it was not the loudest voice that prevailed, but the one with the most respect and the deepest understanding of the Kanun and the ways of the tribe. The sacred traditions of the Ghegs extended beyond law into the very rhythm of daily life. Much of the community's time was spent engaged in agricultural work, with men and women equally involved in maintaining their homes and cultivating the land. The mountains were harsh, and the soil was not always fertile. But the Ghegs were resourceful people who knew how to make use of every corner of their land. Women, in particular, played an essential role in preserving the cultural heritage of the tribe, as they were the keepers of stories, songs, and rituals that had been passed down for centuries. The role of women in Gheg society was one of both respect and responsibility. While they were primarily responsible for the domestic sphere, cooking, weaving, and raising children, they were also deeply involved in the spiritual and cultural life of the tribe. It was said that the women were the heart of the family, ensuring that the teachings of the Kanun and the traditions of the tribe were passed down to the next generation. Women were also instrumental in the agricultural work, planting crops and tending to livestock alongside their husbands. In many ways, their lives were as intertwined with the land and the seasons as the men's were. The seasonal festivals and rituals were another key aspect of life for the Ghegs. These were not just celebrations, but moments when the tribe reaffirmed its connection to the land, the ancestors, and the spiritual world. The festival of the harvest, for example, was a time when the community came together to give thanks for the year's crops, to honor the spirits of the mountains, and to celebrate the unity of the tribe. These festivals were filled with music, dance, and feasting, but also with prayers and rituals that ensured the continued fertility of the land and the prosperity of the people. One of the most important rituals was the ritual of the wolf skin, a ceremony that marked the coming of age of young men in the tribe. During this ceremony, a young boy would be sent into the wilderness, armed only with a knife and his wits, to hunt down a wolf. The wolf, revered as a symbol of strength and survival, was an essential part of Gheg mythology. If the young boy succeeded in bringing back the wolf skin, he would be recognized as a man and allowed to join the ranks of the adult men in the village. This ritual was not only a test of physical prowess but also a spiritual journey, as it symbolized the boy's transformation from childhood to adulthood, from innocence to the harsh realities of the world. In these rituals, the ancestors were never far away. The Ghegs believed that the spirits of the mountains watched over them, guiding them in times of need and protecting them from harm. It was said that the mountains themselves were alive with the spirits of those who had come before, and that their voices could be heard in the wind, the rustling of the trees, and the sound of the rivers flowing down from the peaks. These spirits were honored in daily prayers, and the elders would often speak of them in hushed tones, as if they could hear their voices echoing through the village. The life of a Gheg was difficult, but it was rich with meaning. Every action, from the smallest gesture of kindness to the most significant decision regarding family and land, was governed by the sacred code of the Kanun. This code, ancient and unchanging, bound the people to each other, to the land, and to their ancestors. It provided structure and order in a world where chaos often threatened to break through. And though the world around them was changing, the Ghegs held fast to their traditions, knowing that without them, they would lose not only their way of life but their very identity. In the evenings, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the village, the people would gather around the hearths of their homes, the firelight flickering in their eyes. The stories would begin, tales of ancestors, of great hunts, of love and loss, and of the eternal struggle to uphold the honor of the family. These stories, passed down through generations, were the lifeblood of the tribe, connecting the present to the past, and ensuring that the traditions of the Ghegs would never be forgotten. The mountains of Albania may have been a harsh and unforgiving place, but to the Ghegs, they were home, and as long as the Kanun was upheld, and the traditions were respected, the spirit of the tribe would endure. In the harsh and unforgiving mountains of Albania, survival was not just a matter of daily living. It was a constant battle against the elements. For the Ghegs, the land was both a provider and a punisher. The winters were long and bitter, and the summers short and fleeting. Yet, amidst these challenges, the people of the Highlands had honed a profound relationship with nature. Shaped by centuries of struggle and survival, the art of hunting was one of the most sacred and revered traditions among the Ghegs. From a young age, boys were taught the skills of the hunter, learning not only how to track, trap, and kill, but also how to respect the animals they pursued. Hunting was not a mere sport or a means of filling the stomach. It was a rite of passage, a connection to the ancestors, and a test of one's strength, skill, and courage. In the early mornings, while the mist still clung to the peaks, the men of the tribe would gather in small groups, armed with bows, arrows, and the traditional hunting knives passed down through generations. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and earth, and the only sounds that broke the stillness were the crunch of leaves beneath boots and the distant call of a bird of prey. The men, clad in rough, hand-woven tunics and boots made from animal hides, moved silently through the dense forest, their eyes scanning the terrain for signs of game. The greatest challenge was hunting the wild boar, an animal both feared and revered. It was said that a hunter who could take down a boar would earn the respect of the entire village. To hunt the boar was not just a test of skill. but of bravery and endurance. For the boar was a fierce and unpredictable adversary. Many hunters had lost their lives in the pursuit of these beasts, their names now whispered with a mixture of awe and sorrow. But the wild boar was not the only danger the people of the mountains faced. The wolves, too, roamed the hills, and while they were rarely seen, their presence was always felt. The Ghegs spoke of them in hushed tones, for wolves were creatures of legend, feared for their intelligence and ferocity. In times past, when food was scarce, the wolves would descend from the hills in packs, attacking livestock and threatening the very survival of the village. In these moments, the hunters would gather, armed with spears and fire, to drive the wolves back into the wilderness. The hunt was a sacred duty, but it was not without its social significance. The act of hunting brought the men together, bonding them in a way that was unmatched by any other task. The successful hunter was celebrated with feasts and songs, his name honored in the tales told around the fire. His success was a testament to his strength, skill, and ability to provide for his family and his tribe. It was said that the greatest hunters were those who could not only bring home meat but also the stories of their hunts, stories that would be passed down for generations. Adding to the mythic lore of the Ghegs, the women, though not hunters themselves, played an equally important role in the survival of the tribe. Their responsibilities were no less demanding, though they were centered around maintaining the home and keeping the household running. They were the keepers of the hearth, the weavers of cloth, and the creators of food. In the villages, the women were responsible for gathering herbs and roots, growing vegetables, and preparing the meals that would sustain the tribe through the long winters. They also crafted clothing, spun wool, and made the leather goods that the men would wear on their hunts. The art of weaving, in particular, was a skill passed down from mother to daughter, and the fabrics they created were known for their durability and beauty. But it was not just the practical aspects of life that the women contributed to. They also played a crucial role in the social and spiritual life of the tribe. The women were the keepers of tradition, the ones who passed down the ancient stories and songs that preserved the history and values of the Ghegs. Around the fire, in the long winter nights, the women would tell tales of their ancestors, stories of warriors, heroes, and gods who had shaped the world they knew. These stories were not just entertainment. They were lessons, teaching the younger generation about the importance of honor, loyalty, and courage. Despite their central role in maintaining the household and keeping the traditions alive, the women of the Ghegs were not without their own fierce independence. They were strong, capable, and resourceful, and in times of hardship, they were as capable of survival as the men. In some cases, when the men were away on hunts or in battle, the women would take on the responsibility of defending the village, using the weapons and tactics passed down to them by their ancestors. Their strength was not just physical, but also mental and emotional, for they were the backbone of the tribe, ensuring that life continued even in the most difficult of times. The fierce independence of the Ghegs was a defining characteristic of their culture. It was not just about surviving in a harsh and unforgiving land. It was about maintaining freedom and living according to their own rules. The Ghegs were not subjugated to any outside authority or government. They lived by the Kanun, and in doing so, they had created a society that was both self-sufficient and fiercely protective of its traditions. In the eyes of the Ghegs, there was no greater sin than betrayal, and no greater honor than the loyalty to one's family and tribe. While the men hunted and the women nurtured, the village itself was a tight-knit community, each person knowing their place and role in the larger scheme of things. The village was not just a home, but a living organism, with each person contributing to its survival and prosperity. The elders held the highest respect, and their wisdom was sought in times of conflict or uncertainty. They were the keepers of the Kanun, ensuring that its rules were followed and that the honor of the tribe was maintained. In the evenings, when the work of the day was done, the villagers would gather around the fire, sharing stories, songs, and food. It was a time for reflection, for celebrating successes, and for mourning losses. The fire, a symbol of both warmth and danger, was the heart of the village. It was where the tribe came together to remember their past, to honor their ancestors, and to reaffirm their commitment to each other. The flames danced in the night, casting shadows on the faces of the Ghegs, their eyes reflecting the light of generations past. For the Ghegs, life was not just about surviving. It was about living with purpose, with honor, and with a deep connection to their land and their people. The mountains may have been harsh, but they were also home, and for the people of the highlands, that was enough. As the seasons passed, the people of the Gheg tribe continued to live their lives according to the ancient ways that had sustained their ancestors for centuries. The mountains had shaped them, but they had also shaped the mountains, carving out a way of life that was as deeply ingrained in the land as the roots of the trees that clung to the rocky cliffs. In every face, in every family, in every stone house perched on the edge of a mountain pass, there was the unspoken promise to uphold the traditions, the values, and the sacred bond with the land. But change, like the slow erosion of the mountain slopes, was inevitable. The world outside the highlands had begun to encroach upon the lives of the Ghegs. Roads that once wound through the valleys were now lined with steel and concrete, bringing with them the curious eyes of outsiders and the influence of foreign ways. The younger generation, raised with the comforts of the modern world, began to question the old ways. Some of them dreamed of leaving the mountains, seeking work in the cities or abroad, where the promise of a different kind of life beckoned. Yet, despite these changes, the spirit of the Ghegs remained unbroken, even as the world around them evolved. The core values of their tribe, honor, family, loyalty, and respect for the land, remained steadfast. The elders, though fewer in number, continued to pass down the ancient wisdom, ensuring that the teachings of the Kanun would live on in the hearts of the young. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a gathering took place in the village. It was a rare moment of unity, where families came together to celebrate their heritage and reaffirm their commitment to the values that had sustained them for centuries. The air was thick with the scent of roasting lamb and the sound of ancient songs sung in the Albanian tongue. The older men, seated around a crackling fire, spoke of the Kanun with reverence, reminding the young that the road they walked was paved by the sacrifices of their ancestors. In this moment of reflection, it was clear that while the world might change, the essence of the Gheg people would endure, for they were not just a tribe living in the shadow of the mountains. They were the mountains themselves, resilient, enduring, and unyielding. The mountains had given them life, and they, in turn, had given their lives to the mountains. The last generation of hunters, the ones who still ventured into the deep forests to track the elusive wild boar, had begun to pass on their knowledge to the younger boys. Some were eager to learn, their eyes alight with the thrill of the chase, while others were content to remain in the village, tending to the flocks or working the fields. But all knew that the spirit of the hunt, like the spirit of the land, was something that could never truly die. It would live on, in the stories told by the firelight, in the rituals passed down at family gatherings, in the hearts of those who chose to remain connected to the land of their ancestors. As the years passed, fewer and fewer of the Ghegs remained in the highlands. Many had moved to the cities or sought work abroad, enticed by the promise of a modern, more comfortable life. Yet, despite the lure of the outside world, the memories of the old ways, the songs of the mountains, and the teachings of the Kanun remained firmly rooted in the hearts of those who had left. For the Ghegs, the true wealth was not in material possessions or in the comforts of the modern world. It was in the intangible honor, family, loyalty, and the deep, unshakable bond with the land. It was in the knowledge that, no matter where they went, they carried with them the spirit of the mountains and the legacy of their ancestors. The mountains stood silent, watching as the generations came and went. The village was quieter now, the voices of the old men and women fading into the past. But in the stillness of the highlands, in the rustle of the leaves and the cry of the eagle soaring above, there was an unspoken promise. The spirit of the Ghegs would never be forgotten. And so, the legacy of the Ghegs, the proud people of the mountains, lived on, carried by the wind, by the songs, and by the hearts of those who, no matter where they went, would always be part of the land that had given them life.